US confirms it plans a partial payment in the coming weeks. Burkina Faso's transitional parliament has approved a bill banning all political parties, repealing party charters and financing laws, and consolidating power under the military junta led by Captain Ibrahim Traoré. The move drew concerns from the UN rights chief, while the government defended the ban as a reset to end political polarization. According to media reports, Ethiopia is hosting a secret training camp for thousands of fighters from Sudan's Rapid Support Forces, marking the first direct evidence of Ethiopia's involvement in Sudan's civil war. 8 sources, including a senior Ethiopian official, has said that the United Arab Emirates financed the camp. Now for this hour, we start with Middle East. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will meet with US President Donald Trump tomorrow at 11 a.m. local time at the White House. The meeting will focus on key regional issues, with Iran negotiations as the top priority, while Netanyahu is expected to present Israel's views ahead of ongoing talks with the US, particularly following the recent discussions in Oman. This signals Israel's active role in the diplomatic process with Iran. Now for this discussion, we welcome Mr. Gedalia Blum. He's a Middle East Affairs Analyst, joins us live from Eli. Thank you very much, Mr. Blum, for joining us. Good to see you. Now thank you. Now looking at this, what do you think will be the priority, and what do you think will be discussed about Iran with United States and between the United States and Israel?
Well, I think before I get into the details, I just want to say that Israel is a sovereign country. And with that being said, America is a superpower and has tremendous amount of influence over the world, over the region, and especially over Israel. But when push comes to shove, I think that, and we've seen this in previous administrations, that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is not afraid to say no. And I think that this trip is more or less making sure that the plans don't get away without the red lines drawn for Israel. So I just want to point that out first. But when it comes to Iran, of course, we have our red lines, and there have been official statements that have come out that had very much illustrated that Israel was willing and able to take the lead, whether it be with allies or on our own, against the Iranian regime, the nuclear program, and especially the ballistic missiles program. And I think also Benjamin Netanyahu is going there also making sure that the future of Gaza that also doesn't get away from us as well. I mean, we're seeing that Israel hasn't yet officially joined this peace conference, this peace council. And the only reason why we would actually join is to make sure we have a seat at the table, so we hear what they're actually talking about, not because we're actually giving it any kind of credibility, because everybody on the ground has zero optimism that any kind of international community is going to be able to settle the long-standing conflict with Hamas in Gaza.
Thank you for highlighting that. And Mr. Blum, how do you analyze Israel's capacity right now? Because we saw last year the missile from Iran did penetrate the Iron Dome, and it's still fresh in Israeli people's memory, right?
Yeah, it's very interesting because there's a lot of propaganda that has been shared by the Iranian Islamic regime. But for us in Israel, I mean, I'll tell you, even from a personal perspective, one of the pieces of the ballistic missiles that were shot down landed on my roof. And my son, my 16-year-old child, actually has it sitting on his shelf as a momentum. Of course, there was injuries and there was death. But when it comes to a full outright war that we were all concerned about with Iran and its proxies, I think that we really got away with a lot. We weren't hit hard, and of course, every single death was a tragedy. But overall, what could have transpired during those 12 days of war could have been significantly worse. Our capabilities to make sure, to ensure that the ballistic missiles wouldn't enter into Israel en masse was very successful, especially with the help of the United States, of the Jordanians and our regional partners, whether or not they're public allies with us or not. They had no interest in seeing the Middle East blow up, because I'll tell you, I don't know this personally, but of course there's rumors. There's rumors that Israel is a nuclear power, and when you're fighting a conventional war and you have those capabilities, because you face an existential threat. The fact of the matter is, all of the missile defense, all the ballistic missile defense, whether it be from our allies like America,
Yes.
or our cold allies like Jordan and and other countries, they don't want to see Israel hit so hard that we're experiencing what we would say is an existential threat. And so,
Mr.
because
Blum,
escalation would happen extremely fast and hard. So, yeah.
Mr. Blum, thank you very much for sharing that personal experience. Also, ever since then, how has Israeli defense or stance evolved?
I mean, I think we got a lot smarter, and I think that the technology, in order to coordinate a lot of the missile defense systems, because I don't know if a lot of people understand this, but the missile defense system, it's not just one system, it's a multiple systems, depending on what's being fired at us. Is it being long-range intercontinental ballistic missile, or is it a Qassam from Gaza? These are completely different systems, and they work independently, which and so they're actually drawing it all together. But I think that since June, we've been just like the Iranians have been sprinting to replenish their ballistic missiles with the help of China and Russia. I might add, Israel's also replenishing its defense capabilities and offensive capabilities with the help with America. And so we'll see what happens. But I'll tell you, there's optimism on the ground. In fact, the people on the ground are actually waiting for it to happen already. We don't want to keep waiting and wondering what day the attack is going to happen. We are very close with the Iranian people, and we want them to be free, and we want to have direct flights from Tel Aviv to Tehran next week. But that's not going to happen if this stalemate continues. So we from both sides, the people of Israel and the people of Iran, are actually waiting for this confrontation to happen and to see the final end of the regime.
Thank you very much, Mr. Blum, for sharing that. Please stay with us as we come back. We have a breaking news coming in from U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer has stated that negotiations with Indonesia are expected to be finalized in the next couple of weeks, highlighting the country as a key trade partner. Greer has also mentioned that trade discussions with China will intensify ahead of the upcoming meeting between President Trump and President Xi Jinping in April. On the USMCA, Greer has acknowledged that talks with Canada have been more challenging, but emphasized that negotiations are ongoing. Additionally, he has confirmed that bilateral talks with Mexico are also currently underway as part of efforts to continue strengthening trade relations within North America. Now we move on to Iran and Oman. Iran's top security official, Ali Larijani, is in Oman for talks following recent U.S.-Iran discussions in Muscat. Oman's Minister of the Royal Office, Sultan bin Mohammed Al Numani, meets with the head of the Supreme National Security Council in Iran, Ali Larijani, in Muscat. Larijani, who heads Iran's Supreme National Security Council, is set to meet with Omani Foreign Minister Badr al-Busaidi as well. The discussions will focus on regional developments and economic cooperation between Iran and Oman. Larijani is also expected to visit Qatar after his stay in Oman. Now we welcome back Mr. Blum. He's joining us live from Delhi. Thank you very much, Mr. Blum, for staying with us. Now, what's the relationship between Oman and Iran?
I mean, I'll tell you, it sounds pretty crazy. that Oman is really, they're betting on the Islamic regime of surviving. It doesn't make sense to, it makes sense to host the negotiations. You want to be a host. But when you start to take that to the next level and start working diplomacy, start investing in economic development and cooperation between Oman and the Islamic regime, you're essentially saying, listen, I'm on your side. I want you to survive, and I'm going to invest in your survival. What's going to happen the day after with the country of Iran under new leadership? They are not going to have relationships with Oman. Israel certainly not. The United States probably isn't gonna have to. So it's really, I think, maybe Oman. I mean, nobody's ever talked about Oman in the last, I don't know how many decades. So now that they're hosting in these negotiations and all eyes are on that on there, maybe they're, I don't know, maybe they're thinking that they're not too big for their shoes. And so I really don't know what the inside word is, but I don't think that's a very smart move. I think if anything, you become a neutral player and you host the negotiations and you make sure that people have a place to sleep and that they have security and transportation and that the air conditioning works. And I think that's it. I think once you go beyond that, I think that you are playing with fire, because the day after, everybody's looking at the day after without the leadership of the Islamic regime leading the people of Iran.
So do you think, as you know, we know that it's not just Oman, there are some other countries too still having relationship with Iran, right? It's not just Oman, it's Russia, it's China, maybe it's other countries as well. So do you think they're betting on no regime change? Do you think there's a difference of ground reports or understanding between these countries and the West and also Israel?
I mean, listen, I don't really think they have any love to the Islamic regime. I think what they're looking at the Islamic regime as strategic partners, and I see the Middle East still as a battleground for the Cold War. And so you see, China and Russia is aligned with Iran. Now you're seeing Turkey looking to move in and align with themselves with Iran as well. And you're seeing a number of the Gulf states. And then you see Israel in the West, and then you see some other Gulf states aligning with the West. And I think that you're seeing this East meets West kind of battle. And I think those like Russia and China are looking at Tehran and the leadership there, not as an ally per se, although they do have cooperation, they do have interest in them being in power, but the vacuum that would be created if they were going to leave, and the people then rise up and call for free and fair elections and have a liberal democracy, that not only puts China and Russia on warning, but the whole Middle East, all Saudi Arabia, who hasn't had an election ever, Jordan. I mean, you're talking about this movement of the Cold War, which is essentially the free movement of people, the liberal Western values and democracy, fighting against tyranny, communism, Islamism. And so I think that's what we're seeing here, is that they're seeing kind of like that maybe Tehran could be part of like the House of Cards. If Tehran falls, who else could be next? And could there be another Arab Spring in order to challenge the levers of power that are in the region and beyond?
With that, I'd like to thank Mr. Blum for joining us from Ellie and sharing that insight. Thank you very much. Now we move on to Russia. Russia's FSB security service has detained a third suspect in connection with an attempt to assassinate senior military intelligence officer Vladimir Alexeyev. This follows an attack last week targeting Alexeyev, which has now led to further arrests. According to Russian news agency, the FSB confirmed the detention today. The investigation continues as authorities work to uncover more details behind this incident. Russia's FSB security service has detained a third suspect in connection with an attempt to assassinate senior military intelligence officer Vladimir Alexeyev. This follows an attack last week targeting Alexeyev, which has now led to further arrests. According to Russian news agency, the FSB has confirmed the detention today. The investigation continues as authorities work to uncover more details behind this incident. Now for this discussion, we welcome Professor Georgi Toleraya. He's a professor at Russia Academy of Science. Thank you very much, Professor Toleraya, for joining us again. Good to see you.
Hello.
Now, can you tell us what do we know so far about the arrests that has happened in relation to the assassination attempt of the senior military intelligence officer?
Well, I would say that this time the action was taken by Russian police and FSB, and special services was taken remarkably swift. And of course, this is also the product of our good cooperation with United Arab Emirates, who expelled the suspect immediately. He wanted to, the killer, he immediately took the plane to Dubai, and he was returned. That is very remarkable. And now I think the special services have all the suspect in their hands, but for one lady, a Ukrainian who fled to Ukraine already. And it's almost 100% clear that this was the killing, the action planned and executed by Ukrainian special services. So it, of course, has very great diplomatic repercussions. But anyway, if we speak about the work of security services, it's very good. Although, of course, it raises questions why the security for the top Russian military leaders was not provided. That's already not the first time that the high-ranking generals and people have no security protection, that they live in ordinary flats, in ordinary Moscow city living quarters without any special regime. I think it's time to think about some special measures to protect these people and other people who are involved in the military operation and the government of the state, because we're at war. And there's a little bit of lax security for these people, and more should be invested into this sphere to prevent the recurrence of such incidents in the future. So it's clear that Ukrainians will continue these terrorist activities in Russian soil, and this has to be dealt with seriously.
Thank you for sharing that. And Professor, how do you analyze the current status of Russia-Ukraine, the negotiations that are supposed to take place soon?
Well, there's not much progress, not much going on, and I've said that many times before to a program. I don't think that they would be easy to force Zelensky to make some efforts to achieve peace. He doesn't want it. He simply doesn't want it. He wants to keep on the war, to get the support of the West, to get the money, and to keep his position. He doesn't care about the population of Ukraine, who is now starving and being confronted by cold and sufferings. He doesn't care about his soldiers. All he wants is to keep on getting money, keep on getting armament, and continue the war to keep himself in the spotlight.
Thank you very much, Professor Toleraya, for sharing that insight. Please stay with us. Now we move on to Israel and Australia. Israeli President Isaac Herzog has told Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese that anti-Semitism has no place in Australia. Herzog made these remarks during a memorial service at the Chabad of Bondi Synagogue in Sydney, honoring the 15 victims of a December terror attack. Herzog has condemned the attack as an act of hatred, emphasizing that such actions are unacceptable anywhere. has praised Albanese for Australia's new legislation on gun control, hate speech, and combating extremist groups. Herzog has also met with victims' families before joining Albanese for dinner. The visit highlights ongoing efforts to combat anti-Semitism and hate globally. Now we welcome back Professor Georgi Tolaraya. He is joining us live. Thank you very much, Professor, for staying with us. Now, looking at Israel and Australia's relationship, as in Australia, we have seen some more attacks towards in relation to anti-Semitism. Do you think Australia will be leveling up to make sure these kind of things don't happen again? What are we to make of this Israel-Australia relations now? Is it becoming better?
I've spent several years working in Australia, and I know Bondi area pretty well. I live nearby, and there was a big Jewish community there. And I wouldn't say that there was or is any kind of extraordinary anti-Semitism in Australia. Australia is a very multicultural and tolerant country. And personally, I think that President Herzog, who is himself is a very controversial figure, he's one of the figures who is complicit in the terrorism and genocide in Gaza. So there were protests in Australia against his visit. Actually, even a large part of Jewish community in Australia protested against him being invited. And I personally think that the agenda of this visit shouldn't have included his visit to Bondi. I think it's sort of provocative. And he's not the one to dictate to Albanese, to Premier Albanese, about how Australia should behave in its internal policy, especially when there's no actual reason for that. I think that Israel demands too much from Australia, and I believe that, of course, Australian leadership will have to agree and just to not to make contradiction show. But I don't think it would really help the future relations between Israel and Australia.
With that, I'd like to thank Professor Georgi Tolaraya for joining us and sharing that insight. Thank you very much. Now we move on to U.S. A Honduran immigrant family in Fridley, Minnesota has been staying inside their trailer for a month, fearing arrest by the ICE. The family seeking asylum has faced hardships since both parents lost their jobs. The mother worked at a restaurant that closed after an ICE raid, and the father witnessed his colleagues being arrested. Meanwhile, Brenda Lewis, the Fridley School District Superintendent, patrols the area to protect immigrant children from ICE. Let's listen in.
I received a message shortly after leaving my house that there was a confirmed ICE vehicle in our Club West community parking lot. So I was able to head there, and as soon as I pulled into the parking lot here, I could see that there was 4 agents inside in tactical gear. Once they started to tap on my windshield, I did make the decision that I would roll down my window. And as soon as I did that, the agent on my driver's side reached in and unlocked my door himself, which allowed the agents on my passenger side to open the door, unbuckle my seatbelts. I continued to ask if I was under arrest. I told them that I wanted my rights read to me. I asked what I was being charged with, why I was being pulled from the vehicle. None of these questions were answered. They just told me that they were going to extract me from the vehicle.
Now we move on to France. French President Emmanuel Macron will be visiting India from February 17th to 19th at the invitation of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The two leaders will hold talks to strengthen bilateral ties under the Horizon 2047 roadmap, discussing regional and global issues, including cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. Macron will also be in Mumbai to inaugurate the India-France Year of Innovation, which will run throughout 2026. On February 19th, he will participate in the AI Impact Summit in New Delhi. This visit builds on the mutual trust established during Modi's visit to France in 2025 and deepens the India-France strategic partnership. Now we stay in France. French prosecutors have charged a 79-year-old former educator with aggravated rape and sexual assault. The man, Jacques Levougle, allegedly abused 89 minors across multiple countries between 1967 and 2022. The crimes occurred in countries including Germany, Switzerland, Morocco, and India and Colombia. Authorities have discovered the details on a USB stick containing the suspect's writings, which documented the abuse. Levougle has been in custody since his indictment earlier this year. Prosecutors Etienne Mathieu also revealed that Levougle confessed to the 1970s and 1990s killings of his mother and an aunt. The investigation is ongoing and authorities are urging additional victims to come forward. Let's listen in.
La brigade de Visil va donc s'emparer de ces fichiers numériques, ouvrir une enquête et va investiguer. Travail très long puisque c'est divisé en tomes, il y a 15 tomes, c'est vraiment une matière très, très dense. Et les enquêteurs vont devoir lire la totalité de ces écrits et vont recenser 89 mineurs, l'évocation de 89 mineurs. Les premiers faits remontent à 1967, les derniers faits remontent à 2022. Il s'agit essentiellement d'évocations de rapports sexuels avec des mineurs de 13 à 17 ans.
Now we have a breaking news coming in from UK. United Kingdom's Prime Minister Keir Starmer has described his cabinet as strong and united amid growing pressure over resignations after Peter Mandelson's appointment concerns. Following a cabinet meeting today, the Prime Minister thanked his team for their support and reaffirmed his commitment to leading the party. Prime Minister Starmer also voiced backing for Scottish Labour leader Anas Sava, who remains the most senior figure to call for the PM's resignation. Despite ongoing challenges, Prime Minister Starmer has emphasized that ministers are focused on fulfilling their mandate to drive change and will continue prioritizing the issues that matter most to the British public. That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with the U.S. a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
Hello and welcome to Deep Dive on NewsX World. I'm Asuma Kataukau. For the last year, global trade has felt less like a system of rules and more like a game of high-stakes poker. In the recently reconfigured Washington power corridors, the new mantra is simple: reciprocity. You want access to the American consumer, you better have a seat at the table ready for American goods. Nowhere is this shift more evident than in Bangladesh. Yesterday, February 9, 2026, Dhaka and Washington sealed a landmark trade pact that marks a historically new level in relations. It's a deal born out of months of grueling negotiations led by interim chief advisor Muhammad Yunus, and it could be the lifeline the country's vital garment industry desperately needs. Here are the concrete numbers first. The headline rate. The US has agreed to reduce Bangladesh's reciprocal tariff rate to 19%. That's a significant drop from the initial 37% proposed in early 2025 and slightly below the 20% interim rate set last August. But the real secret sauce of this deal isn't just the lower tariffs. It's the innovative preferential scheme. Under this new mechanism, Bangladesh will receive tariff-free access to the U.S. market for textiles and apparel equivalent to its imports of U.S.-produced cotton and man-made fibers. The calculation is rigorous. It's measured on a square meter basis. Effectively, if Dhaka buys American cotton, it gets to sell the finished shirt back to the U.S. with zero additional duty. It's a classic fiber for fabric swap that turns a traditional trade deficit into a coordinated supply chain. Of course, reciprocity is a two-way street. In exchange for this access, Bangladesh is opening the floodgates. The Yunus administration has agreed to remove barriers to U.S. industrial and agricultural goods. We're talking about everything from chemicals and medical devices to U.S. beef, poultry, and dairy products. And it does not stop at food. Bangladesh has committed to purchasing 25 aircrafts from American giant Boeing, a deal valued at over $3 billion. Furthermore, Dhaka is signing on for $15 billion in U.S. energy products, including LNG, over the next 15 years. Washington isn't just asking for free trade, it is asking for guaranteed sales. But how does this stack up against the rest of the region? This is where the geopolitics gets spicy. In the race for the American closet, Bangladesh is now running a very tight heat with its neighbors. India recently secured an 18% rate, just 1 point lower than Bangladesh. But India's deal required cutting Russian oil imports and a staggering $500 billion purchase commitment. Vietnam, Bangladesh's biggest rival in apparel. Vietnam is currently sitting at a 20% reciprocal tariff. This new deal officially makes Bangladesh products more competitive than Vietnamese ones in the U.S. ports. Pakistan currently tied with Bangladesh at 19%. The strategic context here is clear. Under President Trump's Reciprocal Trade Act, the U.S. is systematically dismantling old preferential systems like GSP in favor of these bilateral quid pro quo pacts. By moving fast, the Yunus government has ensured that Bangladesh isn't left behind in the tariff bloodbath. However, the deal comes with strings attached. Bangladesh has committed to stricter enforcement of labor rights, a moratorium on WTO electronic transmission duties, and the adoption of U.S. vehicle safety standards. It is a full-scale realignment of Bangladesh's regulatory DNA towards Washington. Bottom line, the U.S.-Bangladesh trade deal is a pragmatic masterclass in survival. By tying its exports to the import of American raw materials, Bangladesh has created a win-win that insulates its garment sector from protectionist winds. The question is whether the domestic economy can absorb the influx of American agricultural and industrial competition. But in a world where tariffs are the new weaponry, Dhaka just secured a very sturdy shield. As Bangladesh heads towards general elections this week, this trade deal may well be the crowning economic achievement of the interim regime. Now for this, we welcome Ms. Mitali Nikore. She's an economist, joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Ms. Nikore, for joining us. Good to see you. Now looking at Bangladesh and US, the deal allows zero tariff access for garments made with US cotton on a square meter basis. Does this reciprocal volume requirement risk turning Bangladesh into a captive market for US raw materials, potentially preventing manufacturers from sourcing cheaper or higher quality textiles from elsewhere?
So, what is the hardest part, I think, when it comes to manufacturing any commodity and particularly textiles is that, you need to have clarity on a production process, and that production process has to be uniform across your factory. So, say even if I'm an MSME, I can't have, one part of my factory which is manufacturing textile-based goods using US cotton, and then another part of my factory which is using cotton which is domestic, say produced within Bangladesh itself. And I cannot have another part which is producing, using cotton that's been imported from elsewhere for a different market. It's just not possible. That is not how any economy or any particular factory would achieve economies of scale. So I do feel that this particular measure and this particular, clause that Bangladesh has agreed to in its deal is quite problematic, and often and very honestly, it reminds me of the colonial times. It reminds me of a time when India was a much bigger country, and there was this traditional imposition by the British colonies on Bengal, the United Bengal at that time, to use English cotton. And that was how the deindustrialization of Bengal began. So, to be very honest, I find this particular clause to be extremely problematic, and I feel like by agreeing to it, Bangladesh has really tied itself into a few knots.
Thank you for highlighting that, Ms. Nikore. Now, staying on this, Bangladesh has agreed to also open its doors to US beef, poultry, and dairy. Given that these sectors are highly subsidized in the US, can Bangladesh's domestic farming sector survive this influx, or are we looking at permanent displacement of local producers?
So on that, I have a slightly different take. I think that for the way the Bangladesh economy is structured, I do think that the imports from the US will be priced very differently from the local, local food products, and it's not that a lot of cities in Bangladesh would be able to absorb, the imports from the US. It would mainly be concentrated in cities, particularly cities like Dhaka, Sylhet, some of the larger cities, possibly even in the, Tamabil area. And it is even possible that there may be some, premiumization that is associated with these imports. But the market will remain limited, and I do think that the local manufacturers will then be limited to, some of the smaller areas, the smaller cities and rural areas. But I don't see the sector getting wiped out in any way. And also, Bangladesh does export quite a lot of its meat outside of Bangladesh as well, and I do think that will continue in its current form. So I do think it'll open the market for premium products.
Thank you for highlighting that, Ms. Nikore. And now, by adopting US FDA certifications and vehicle safety standards, Bangladesh is effectively aligning its regulatory DNA with Washington. Does this streamline trade at the cost of making significantly harder for Bangladesh to trade with other major partners like the EU or China, which has different standards?
So I think again it's a bit different for EU and a bit different for China. I think the US FDA standards harmonize well with the EU standards. The EU standards are actually even tougher than the US FDA standards, particularly when it comes to green manufacturing requirements and environmental regulations. So the EU standards in any case were something that were not really being met even before from Bangladesh. I think the biggest problem is going to be alignment with Chinese standards, because China's standards are very different from US FDA. They allow for a lot more materials in manufacturing. They allow for also for the electric vehicles, they allow for very different levels of procurement processes, manufacturing processes, and they don't have a lot of very stringent ESG regulations. They don't have a very stringent manufacturing process regulation. So if Bangladesh sets its automotive standards to meet US FDA requirements, it essentially creates a scenario where a lot of Chinese vehicles may not, and Chinese companies may not actually qualify under the US FDA standards, and then Bangladesh as a market closes for them. On the other hand, US manufactured cars and vehicles can easily come in. And of course, this is not only about passenger cars, but about, logistics vehicles and two-wheelers, which are, being imported in large numbers in Bangladesh.
And with Bangladesh now at a 19% rate plus the unique fiber for fabric incentive, how does this disrupt the competitive balance against India at 18%, Pakistan at 19%, and Vietnam at 20%? And is Washington effectively using these tiered tariff rates to force a loyalty race among South and Southeast Asian nations to see who can offer the best purchase commitments for American goods?
There is no doubt that Washington is forcing the countries in South and Southeast Asia, all of which are known for textile manufacturing, all of which are known for engineering goods, machinery goods manufacturing. See, I would say that amongst all these countries, very honestly, India seems to have secured the best deal, because India has also offered purchase commitments, and none of these other countries have been able to offer purchase commitments because of the fact that their economies are not as large as the Indian economy, and they are, their per capita incomes are much lower than the Indian per capita income, and also India's growth and purchasing power is far ahead. So it's very difficult to compare, and also quite unfair to compare India with with Bangladesh and with Vietnam. I mean, Vietnam still we can have a comparison, but with Bangladesh, it's absolutely impossible to compare India. And it's quite surprising that a country like Bangladesh should go ahead and trade away so much of its autonomy when it comes to the auto sector or the textile sector, just to secure a 1 or 2% reduction in the tariffs, because it's still a tariff that's 1% higher than India. And overall, we've seen a lot of textile factories in Bangladesh shut down over the last year simply because of law and order issues as well. So it's not only about, just competitiveness on the cost, but also on the working conditions and the operating conditions for a number of global textile units, which have actually moved operations to South India and West India. So, very honestly, definitely these moves by Washington are not in line with the rules-based trading order. Definitely, these moves by Washington are meant to arm twist developing countries and the global South, and that is, leading us into a very dangerous era of globalization. But at the same time, the deal that Bangladesh has secured seems to have a number of, words of caution for the country's economic future.
With that, I'd like to thank Ms. Nikore for sharing that deep insight with us on NewsX World.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that's a wrap on this edition of Deep Dive. Stay tuned to NewsX World for more news and updates.
what we can do as the Inter-Parliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reforms, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi, during Operation Sindoor,
UK Prime Minister Starmer faces growing pressure amid scandal. McSweeney resigns over Middleton's appointment. Putin's special envoy predicts Starmer's resignation. Middleton's Epstein ties spark police investigation. Starmer's leadership in crisis. Let's understand what's coming next.
Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching another episode of Explained. The UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer is facing mounting pressure after the resignation of his Chief of Staff, Morgan McSweeney, which comes amid a growing controversy over the appointment of Peter Mandelson as the UK's ambassador to the United States. The scandal centres around Mandelson's long-standing ties to late financier and convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, which continued even after Epstein's 2008 conviction for soliciting prostitution from minors. Despite these connections, Starmer pressed ahead with Mandelson's appointment. This move has now sparked widespread criticism, with many questioning the Prime Minister Starmer's judgment. Morgan McSweeney, who played a pivotal role in advising Starmer on this decision, took full responsibility for the mistake. In his resignation statement, McSweeney has acknowledged that the appointment had been wrong, causing damage to the Labour Party and eroding public trust in politics. His departure has left Starmer facing intensified calls for his own resignation. Let's listen in to some of Starmer's statements on the ongoing situation.
It had been publicly known for some time that Mandelson knew Epstein, but none of us knew the depth and the darkness of that relationship. But we are changing this country for the better. We had 14 long years of failure under the Tory government, and we're correcting that. We've stabilised the economy, we've put a huge amount of investment into our public services, and we're rebuilding our communities. And I intend to go on doing that vital work for our country, because I believe it is the absolute focus and the first importance for this government. The information now available makes clear that the answers he gave were lies. He portrayed Epstein as someone he barely knew. And when that became clear, and it was not true, I sacked him. Such deceit is incompatible with public service.
As the pressure mounts, Russian envoy Kirill Dmitriev has weighed in, suggesting Starmer's leadership could soon be in jeopardy. In a recent social media post, Dmitriev has implied that Starmer's political future could be in danger, predicting that the Prime Minister might soon be forced to step down. Dmitriev's comments have added a new layer to the political crisis, with many now questioning whether Starmer can survive the fallout. But as Starmer fights to keep his position, the fallout continues, with more details emerging about how Morgan McSweeney's role in the appointment. On January the 8th, McSweeney, who played a central role in advising Prime Minister Keir Starmer on the appointment of Lord Peter Mandelson, formerly Lord, took responsibility for the mistake. In a statement, McSweeney acknowledged that the decision to appoint Mandelson was a wrong one. While he did not oversee the due diligence and vetting process, he has stressed the need for, quote, a fundamental overhaul of how such decisions are made in the future. McSweeney's statement has clearly indicated that he believed the only honourable course of action was to step down. Interestingly, sources close to Downing Street have since revealed that his decision to resign was a mutual agreement between McSweeney and Starmer. This means that the two men had a shared understanding of the gravity of the situation. According to these sources, McSweeney had initially been, quote, in two minds about resigning until the pressure built to a point where it became clear that his departure was inevitable. As the crisis deepens, attention turns back to Peter Mandelson and his links to Jeffrey Epstein, which continue to dominate the scandal. The latest release of the Epstein files by the US Department of Justice has revealed new and disturbing information about Mandelson's dealings with Epstein, including financial transactions that raise serious questions. Between 2003 and 2004, Epstein made several payments totaling to $75,000 to accounts linked to Mandelson and his partner. These payments were made while Mandelson was a government minister. Furthermore, details have emerged about email exchanges between Mandelson and Epstein, which included discussions of market-sensitive government plans. These included UK tax policy and the government's strategy for asset sales to relieve the country's debt burden during the 2008 financial crisis. These exchanges raised serious questions about the integrity of Mandelson's actions and the possibility that he used his political position to further the interests of Epstein and his wealthy associates. In response to these allegations, London's Metropolitan Police Service have opened a full investigation into possible misconduct in public office. Officers have carried out search warrants at two properties linked to Mandelson, one in Camden, London, and another in Wiltshire. Mandelson has not been arrested yet, and the investigation remains active. Mandelson, who was appointed UK ambassador to the US in 2024, was removed from his role in September of last year after the first round of revelations came to light regarding his close ties to the late sex offender. As of now, Mandelson has publicly apologised, regretting his continued association with Epstein after the financier's 2008 conviction. He has insisted that he was misled by Epstein and wished he had discovered the truth sooner. However, the damage to his reputation and that of the Starmer government is clear. The scandal has not only undermined trust in Mandelson, but also cast a shadow over Starmer's leadership. The public backlash has been intense, with many questioning how such a person could have been chosen to represent the UK in such a crucial diplomatic post. As the scandal deepens, the UK media has gone into overdrive, launching what some have called Operation Save Starmer. British newspapers are scrutinising the Prime Minister's leadership, questioning whether he can survive the political storm caused by the Mandelson controversy. Opposition leaders, including Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch, have been quick to call for Starmer's resignation, claiming that he must be accountable for the damaging decisions made under his leadership. Moreover, Reform UK leader Nigel Farage has also predicted that Starmer will not survive beyond the local elections, a prediction that is gaining traction amongst political pundits. Inside his own party, Labour MPs are expressing increasingly loud concerns about his future. Some are questioning whether Starmer can rebuild his credibility after a string of political setbacks, including the Mandelson scandal and unpopular U-turn policies. In another setback for UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, another breakthrough has just come through. Tim Allen, his Executive Director of Communications, has now resigned as well. Allen, who was appointed in September 2025 to overhaul Downing Street's messaging, has stepped down amidst the continuing crisis surrounding the Mandelson scandal. Allen, who had been brought in to improve the government's public image, now faces scrutiny over potential conflicts of interest. Reports have revealed that he holds a 10% shareholding in Strand Partners, a lobby firm. This raises questions about whether his business interests could have influenced his work for the government, particularly as the scandal over Mandelson and Epstein continues to unfold. With the political turmoil intensifying in the United Kingdom, Londoners have sharply divided on how to view the current situation. Let's now hear what some residents have to say about the future of Starmer's leadership.
I think it's definitely a difficult time for him. Will he survive? I think he'll probably blow over. I think it's probably a bit of a storm. I think he's possibly been viewed a little bit harshly, but it's always difficult to know the truth about these things.
I think Keir Starmer, at first I thought he was good when he first came in. However, my opinion's changed a lot. I think he's pretty terrible now, especially with the whole Mandelson thing going on. I think he'll last the week, but yeah.
Well, let's see what happens, but with everything going on, I don't think he's got the strength to do it.
Well, that's all for this episode of Explained. Stay tuned as we bring you more in-depth insights and stories that matter.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Inter-Parliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
Hello and welcome. I'm Suma Katauka and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. A U.S. judge blocks the deportation of Rumeysa Öztürk, a Turkish student at Tufts University. According to her lawyers, the decision is filed at a federal appeals court after her arrest during a crackdown on pro-Palestinian activists last year. Hong Kong leader John Lee praises the 20-year sentence given to pro-democracy media tycoon Jimmy Lai, calling his crimes severe. The United States, United Kingdom, and the United Nations condemned the jailing as unjust and urge his release on humanitarian grounds. Jeffrey Epstein's associate Ghislaine Maxwell appears virtually from a Texas prison and refuses to answer the U.S. House Oversight Committee. Chair James Comer says she invokes the Fifth Amendment, blocking questions on Epstein and possible co-conspirators. U.S. President Donald Trump opposes Israel's annexation of the occupied West Bank as international criticism grows. The White House says a stable West Bank is key to Israel's security and regional peace. The United States and Armenia have agreed to cooperate on civil, nuclear energy, deepening ties. The move follows a U.S.-brokered South Caucasus peace deal, with Washington seeking to draw Yerevan closer. The UN says it is awaiting clarity on how much of nearly $4 billion in repairs the U.S. Trump administration will pay and when. UN chief warns the imminent financial collapse as the U.S. confirms it plans a partial payment in the coming weeks. Burkina Faso's transitional parliament has approved a bill banning all political parties, repealing party charters and financing laws, and consolidating power under the military junta led by Captain Ibrahim Traoré. The move drew concerns from the UN rights chief, while the government defended the ban as a reset to end political polarization. A According to media reports, Ethiopia is hosting a secret training camp for thousands of fighters from Sudan's Rapid Support Forces, marking the first direct evidence of Ethiopia's involvement in Sudan's civil war. 8 sources, including a senior Ethiopian official, said the United Arab Emirates financed the camp. U.S. lawmakers have accused the Department of Justice of improperly redacting files related to late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Members of Congress began reviewing unredacted versions of the files last week, part of the Epstein Files Transparency Act. Democratic Representatives Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie, who co-sponsored the law, flagged discrepancies, saying the DOJ did not comply with the law's requirement. Some files were criticized for containing identifiable email addresses and nude photos of potential victims. The DOJ has since removed flagged files and unredacted some names, including those of Epstein and his associate Ghislaine Maxwell. However, Khanna and Massie argue that the redactions still violate the law, specifically pointing to names that remain obscured. The DOJ responded, claiming a technical or human error and reaffirming its commitment to transparency, but the controversy over the handling of these files continues. Now we welcome Professor David K. Johnston. He's a professor at Rochester Institute of Technology, joins us live from New York. Thank you very much, Professor Johnston, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now looking at this,
good to be here. Thank you.
Now looking at this, a lot of people have raised concerns and criticized this latest revelations, right, including the victims. What do you think? What should be done? And also, do you think that there was a lack of maybe consciousness or towards these victims who have been exposed?
I think the best evidence, having read the statute and seen some of the released documents, is that this is part of a continuing effort of non-compliance by the Trump administration. There are a number of young women whose images are available where it's easy to link data from documents to identify someone, and I don't think that happened by mistake. Given Donald Trump's history and my knowing him for almost 40 years, this is the kind of intimidation tactic, because the message being sent to the young women is, many of whom have never gone public, they operate in court under pseudonyms, is you mess with us, we'll embarrass you. And secondly, the redaction of names in various of the emails seems to clearly violate the statute, because no one is to have their name withheld for reputational value. And there's one other development which I find very troubling. Throughout the Epstein affair, there have been discussions about whether some young women may have been murdered and disappeared. And I've treated those with the same skepticism that I did all sorts of things during the 40 years I did investigative reporting for the New York Times and others. But it turns out that Jeffrey Epstein bought 350 gallons of sulfuric acid. We know that sulfuric acid can be used to quickly dissolve a body, destroy the DNA. It does tend to leave behind micro traces of what's happened. But this is a very troubling development that is going to need a lot of attention, because if it was used for foul purposes, that puts a whole new picture on the repeated failures of federal officials and Trump appointees to properly investigate what was going on here.
That is exactly so disturbing. Now, also looking at, Jeffrey Epstein's associate, Ghislaine Maxwell, has appeared virtually from Texas prison. However, she refused to answer the U.S. House Oversight Committee, right? So what happens, and what about the justice?
Well, there's a lot of talk in this country, in the U.S., that Trump is going to pardon Ghislaine Maxwell. He will never do that. He may grant her clemency. If he pardons her, she can be required to testify because she has no legal jeopardy, and if she refuses, she can be given a prison sentence for refusing to testify. If he gives her clemency, she's still in legal jeopardy, and she can exercise her Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. But she is not going to do anything that will upset Donald Trump while she is trying to get him to spring her from prison. So this was mostly an exercise by the Republican leaders of the committee in Congress in trying to say, see, we're really looking for everything, when there was no reason to expect she would testify, and she is not.
And how do you think this whole thing is affecting the transparency or the public trust towards also the administration, of course, and DOJ, and also the image of political elites in the West?
Yeah, I think this is really having quite a profound effect. And one of the big issues being discussed in American news organizations and online chats is the fact that the British and some other foreign countries have taken items about their sovereigns or diplomats in the Epstein files and are aggressively pursuing them. Keir Starmer may well have to resign as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom because his appointee as ambassador to the US is all over the Epstein files. That's causing a lot of discussion about why is it that the Europeans are aggressively pursuing these matters and we are not in the US. And of course, the reason is because Donald Trump is running a protection racket here. He is in the files more than 5,000 times, and there have been some US commentators have pointed out that God is referenced in the Old Testament and the New only about 4,000 times. Trump, though, insists, I never did anything, I did nothing wrong. And as I warned would happen, well, I think a year or more ago, the Justice Department's position is that they can't release many of the documents, including photographs or videotapes that would show grown men in compromising positions with girls as young as 13, because under American law, mere viewing of such an image is a felony. And so they have the perfect setup here to withhold what would be conclusive evidence, photographs from the Epstein estate of various men in sexual acts with girls who are not old enough to give consent, that is, who are being raped.
Thank you very much, Professor Johnston, for sharing that. Please stay with us as we stay on this news. Now, the U.S. Justice Department has moved to overturn the conviction of Steve Bannon, former advisor to President Donald Trump in connection with the January 6 Capitol attack. Bannon was sentenced to 4 months in prison for contempt of Congress after defying a subpoena to testify before the committee investigating the attack. He was released in October 2024. The Justice Department filed a motion in the Supreme Court seeking to send Bannon's case back to a lower court. In the filing, they request that the case be dismissed with prejudice. Bannon, who has yet to comment, is set to not oppose the motion. Now we welcome back Professor David K. Johnston. Thank you very much, Professor, for staying with us. The U.S. Justice Department has moved to overturn the conviction of Steve Bannon, former advisor to President Donald Trump in connection with the January 6 Capitol attack. Bannon was sentenced to 4 months in prison for contempt of Congress after defying a subpoena to testify before the committee investigating the attack. He was released in October 2024. The Justice Department filed a motion in the Supreme Court seeking to send Bannon's case back to a lower court. In the filing, they request that the case be dismissed with prejudice. Bannon, who has yet to comment, is set to not oppose the motion. The U.S. Justice Department has moved to overturn the conviction of Steve Bannon, former advisor to President Donald Trump in connection with the January 6 Capitol attack. Bannon was sentenced to 4 months in prison for contempt of Congress after defying a subpoena to testify before the attack. He was released in October 2024. Now we have a breaking news coming in. According to health officials, Israeli airstrikes and gunfire have killed 5 Palestinians in Gaza. The attacks took place on 10th February, undermining a 4-month-old U.S.-brokered truce. In Deir al-Balah, 2 people were killed in an airstrike while riding an electric bike. Later, a woman was also killed by Israeli drone fire in the same area. And troops shot a man in Khan Yunis. Another man was shot dead by Israeli gunfire in Jabalia as well. Now we move on to Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson Ismail Baghei has said that recent nuclear talks with the US have helped Tehran assess Washington's seriousness. The brief meeting in Muscat, Oman showed enough consensus to continue diplomatic efforts. Baghei has emphasized that both sides showed mutual understanding, making the continuation of talks possible. Last week, US and Iranian diplomats met with Omani mediators to revive diplomacy following concerns over rising tensions. Baghei has also noted the planned visit of Iran's Ali Larijani to Qatar following his trip to Oman. Regarding Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's upcoming Washington visit, Baghei warned the US must act independently of foreign pressures. Let's listen in.
اساساً ریشه تبدیل موضوع هسته‌ای ایران، برنامه هسته‌ای صلح‌آمیز ایران به عنوان یک بحران تصنعی رژیم صهیونیستی بود که از حدود 40 سال قبل مدام این گزاره رو تکرار میکنه که ایران به دنبال بمب هسته‌ای است و سعی میکنه که نوعی ترس موهوم رو بر دنیا تحمیل بکنه به خاطر بمب هسته‌ای ناموجود ایران.
Now we welcome retired Major General Siddharth. He's a senior strategic and international affairs expert, joins us live from Jaipur. Thank you very much, Major General Siddharth, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now looking at thank you. Good evening. Now looking at this, in my analysis, it seems like while Iran thinks it was good and they're hopeful or positive about the latest round of talks, while U.S. hasn't even issued a statement, they have moved to soon to be welcoming Netanyahu in U.S. and also the fact that they have moved more armada towards the Gulf. Is there a difference between their understanding or how they feel about the situation and ongoing talks? What's your analysis?
Asoma, good question.
Thank you.
This question has got multiple parts or subparts. One of them, what was the case just a few hours back? The few hours back was USA has been demanding, or Netanyahu has been demanding, that the enrichment of the uranium or going ahead with the nuclear warheads, that should be suspended completely, number one. Number two, the missile test trial and the complete architecture and the capability must be done away with. And third, the proxies have to be reined in. So out of all this, Iran has narrowed down to only one aspect, that nothing doing. It is only the uranium, enriched uranium, that is the nuclear issue which is to be discussed. The latest input which has come to me, which perhaps indirectly you have alluded in your preamble, is that Iran has projected the demand that they are prepared to forego nuclear enrichment and going ahead with the nuclear warhead, provided all sanctions imposed against Iran are, forfeited or they are cancelled or they are lifted. So is US going to lift all the sanctions? I don't think so, because it's a game of leverage. So if US doesn't actually lift the ban or the sanctions against Iran, will Iran reconcile to the fact, because there is a huge armada which is encircled Iran inside the Persian Gulf and towards Mediterranean? I don't think so. Iran is not going to come under pressure. It has got a huge stockpile or weapons and platforms available, and it has got those kind of missiles which perhaps it has not used so far. And don't be shocked and surprised if it comes out with, toy-toying or tactical nuclear missile one fine day. That will be a dangerous turning point and surprise to every one of us, which New York Times has been actually shouting from the rooftop right from 2000, 2006, 10. Number of articles have come out in Western media platforms. So that is one part. Second part is my assessment about the whole thing. That means indirectly you are asking, is US going to attack Iran? I don't think so. There are many ifs and buts attached to this particular thing. The Venezuela pressure on Venezuela action is yet to ease out within US. Epstein file is actually burning the inner esteem and the character of the US as a superpower. And every day there are new names propping up, and it has gone beyond the boundaries of US into European Union and UK, and a lot of royal and high profile personalities are coming into the limelight. Third point and most important point is that what is the trigger when US is going to decide whether either to attack or not to attack? That trigger is yet to come, unlikely to come, because Donald Trump is very cautious about a couple of issues. The elections are around the corner. There are 25 seats in the Senate which are falling vacant, and out of 25, 8 are of, I think, the Republican, and rest are Democrats. And it is given to understand that of late, the sway is in the favor of the Democrats. Recently, the Democrats have had thumping majority, and they have observed the successful story of the political mandate or the electioneering mandate in the United States, and they are coming up with the best, with the majority against that of Republicans. Last point is the crucial point which you are pointedly asking. So what are they going to do now? In my opinion, if at all there is going to be an attack, Netanyahu will be attacking, not the American forces. In any case, there are no boots on ground. Should that happen, whether it is Netanyahu or the American forces, Iran is going to retaliate with lots of violence and with lots of force. It is going to retaliate regardless of who attacks against the... Yeah.
So, Major General, if building on your answer, how do you analyze Israel's readiness and Israel's capacity? As we know that last year, the 12-day war, Israel's Iron Dome was penetrated. So, do you think they have built up? Do you think they have, how do you think their defense strategy has changed or evolved?
As far as the preparedness of the Israelis are concerned, their Iron Dome has not been upgraded till now. The integration is just the same as it was before. The Iron Dome is only up to the ranges, rocket ranges up to 70 kilometers. These are short-range rockets, whereas Iran has got long-range hypersonic missiles, it has got ballistic missiles. It will be very easy for the missiles of Iran to penetrate through the Iron Dome and hit the vulnerable areas and vulnerable points as Israel. Therefore, despite the fact that Israel may be in the best of its preparedness, yet they can be penetrated by the hypersonic missiles, and sensitive spots can be hit very effectively and accurately.
Thank you very much, Major General, for sharing that deep insight with us. Please stay with us. Now, you're looking at UN, the United Nations, in talks to re-establish its Human Rights Office in Venezuela 2 years after its expulsion. Discussions between UN Rights Chief Volker Turk and interim President Delcy Rodriguez took place on January 26th, with the UN team visiting Caracas through February 4th. Support was offered to help develop a roadmap for reconciliation, replacing human rights at the center. Meanwhile, rights monitoring has continued from Panama since the expulsion in 2024. Hundreds of prisoners have been freed, though 700 people remain in detention. The amnesty law to release more dissidents was postponed, with the UN stressing that it must meet international standards. Now we welcome back retired Major General Siddhakarji. He is joining us live from Jaipur. Thank you very much, Major General, for staying with us. Now, how are we to, make? Do you think UN is capable of opening up this channel once again in Venezuela? And how do you think Delcy Rodriguez is dealing with her recently, her current government to keep her government together, or to keep her country together?
Second question first. She is navigating a very complex situation of the Venezuelan society and the country, and she's doing a good job as of now, but there are lots of unpredictability and uncertainties as to how things may turn out to be. All the political prisoners, majority of them have been released from the prisons. You said in your question that there are 700 odd more are awaited, and people are demanding for the early release. All these things are happening at the dictate or the behest of United States. Number two, the first question now. Now, will the United Nations office be able to restore status quo ante? That means, will they be able to go back to Venezuela from where they had been kicked out a couple of months back, maybe 6 or 8 months, or maybe 1 year back? Well, unless the local government supports, they will not be able to re-establish their office. And re-establishing infrastructure is one thing, but re-establishing their connect with the environment to discharge a mandate is another thing. Discharge of the mandate is primary. Now, unless they have favorable response metrics from the society, from the environment, they will not be able to perform or discharge their duties effectively. Therefore, it all depends as to how best the current government under the vice presidentship of Delcy Rodriguez, what kind of support they actually extend. Because there is a difference between the lip service and what they do on the ground. Presently, it appears that they are being pushed by the United States and the United Nations to go back to Venezuela. However, time will tell us as to how effective they will be on the ground, and will they be able to discharge the mandate to the objective which has been outlined for them. Back to you, Asuma.
Unfortunately, we are running out of time for this discussion, but thank you very much, Major General, for joining us and sharing that insight with us. Now we move on to Russia. Russia's communications regulator, Roskomnadzor, has begun restricting the operation of Telegram, targeting one of the country's most widely used messaging platform. The move fits into the Kremlin's broader push to replace Western digital services with domestic alternatives, as it advances plans for a so-called sovereign internet, tightening state control over online communications. Roskomnadzor has said that it will continue to impose consistent restrictions on the Telegram messenger in order to enforce Russian legislation and ensure the protection of citizens. Telegram users across Russia have reported widespread disruptions for a second consecutive day. Complaints on outage monitoring services surged to around 15,000 so far, far above normal levels, with most users reporting problems downloading photos and videos. Others said the app was slow to load or failed to connect altogether. The apparent move comes amid a broader tightening of digital controls. In August 2025, Roskomnadzor has effectively blocked calls via Telegram and WhatsApp, claiming the services was widely used for fraud, extortion, and recruiting citizens for sabotage activities. Now we move on to AI. The government of India has set a deadline of 3 hours for social media platforms to remove content that is flagged by the authorities for violating local laws, according to new order issued by the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology of India. The early octopus deadline was 36 hours, as new rules will come into force from February 20, 2026. The government tightened rules around for handling AI-generated and synthetic content, including deepfakes on social media platforms such as X and Instagram. The new rules also include mandatory labeling of AI content. AI-generated content will be treated on par with other information for determining unlawful acts under its rules. The government notified amendments to the Information Technology Rules 2021 that formally define AI-generated and synthetic content. That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news and updates from around the world.
What we can do as the Inter-Parliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with the US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws, and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching The World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines of the hour. A US judge blocks the deportation of Rumsia Ozturk, a Turkish student at Tufts University, according to her lawyers. The decision is filed at a federal appeals court after her arrest during a crackdown on pro-Palestinian activists. Hong Kong leader John Lee praises the 20-year sentence given to pro-democracy media tycoon Jimmy Lai, calling his crimes severe. The United States, United Kingdom and the United Nations condemn the jailing as unjust and urge his release on humanitarian grounds. Jeffrey Epstein associate Ghislaine Maxwell appears virtually from a Texas prison and refuses to answer the U.S. House Oversight Committee. Chair James Comer says she invokes the Fifth Amendment, blocking questions on Epstein and possible co-conspirators. US President Donald Trump opposes Israel's annexation of the occupied West Bank as international criticism grows. The White House says a stable West Bank is key to Israel's security and regional peace. The United States and Armenia have agreed to cooperate on civil nuclear energy, deepening ties. The move follows a US-brokered South Caucasus peace deal, with Washington seeking to draw Yerevan closer. The United Nations says it is awaiting clarity on how much of nearly $4 billion in arrears the Trump administration will pay and when. UN Chief Antonio Guterres warns of imminent financial collapse as the US warns it plans a partial payment in the coming weeks. French President Emmanuel Macron says Europe must prepare for further confrontation with the United States. He warns Washington could target the EU over digital rules and tariffs, saying the Trump administration is increasingly hostile to Europe. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu heads to Washington to urge President Trump to expand nuclear talks with Iran as US military pressure builds. Israel wants to curb Iran's enrichment, missiles and regional allies, while Tehran rejects those demands without sanctions relief. We start this hour in Eastern Europe, and power company DTEK says that a Russian attack has damaged an energy facility in Ukraine's southern Odessa region. The company reported that the damage is extensive and repairs will take time. Some settlements in the area were partially left without power. Critical infrastructure is relying on generators while restoration efforts are now underway. Moscow has been targeting Ukraine's energy infrastructure since October, leaving millions without power in freezing temperatures. Saul Sadka joins us now. He is a political commentator. He joins us live from Tel Aviv. Saul, thank you so much for joining us here on the program. Moscow, of course, has gone after Ukraine's energy infrastructure, particularly focusing in on these winter months where Ukrainian civilians in particular are facing temperatures below like 10 degrees Celsius, suffering, which leads to them, of course, suffering a near humanitarian crisis. However, their resilience stands firm in this war. What more can you tell us about the consistent barrage that Moscow is launching on Ukraine, especially as the winter comes to an end now?
Well, what we're seeing is the tactics that they've now been using for years. The war that started in February 2022 is about to enter its fifth year. This was supposed to be a three-day march for Putin's troops, and it has ended in a complete catastrophe for him. And what we can see when we look at it is that really, if all they have left, if the final act that they can do is to lob missiles at Ukrainian domestic infrastructure, most likely they're doing that because they don't have any better options. Certainly any other option, any other use of those weapons against military targets would be better for them, but really all they have left is terror weapons. It's unclear how many more years this war can drag on for. And certainly the damage to Ukraine is extreme, but the damage to Russia, its international standing, its soft power, its hard power, its military equipment, and probably in the end, its own unity is going to be much faster.
And Saul, of course, we've seen diplomatic developments over the past few days, of course. Direct talks taking place in Abu Dhabi between Ukraine, Russia and the United States, with envoys all being present at the meeting. We've heard positive statements coming out of all of the sides. However, what we're not really being revealed to about is how those negotiations are going, particularly when it comes to security guarantees, territory, amongst other things. Russia has just come out and says that there's no date now for these next round of talks, which we saw previously announced pretty much straight after the first round. What does this say about the way in which the current ways are going at the negotiating table?
It looks very curious what's going on there, very confusing. But you have to remember that Russia has now put its entire economy on a war footing. A large part of its economy is based on this war continuing. So they have a very large problem, because if the war would actually come to an end, even on their own terms, as long as Ukraine is allowed to continue to fortify its eastern flank, they would then be in a situation where their economy would immediately collapse with the end of the war. The economy is really continuing on vapors at the moment, and those vapors are supplied entirely by the meat grinder on their western border with Ukraine. And as soon as that comes to an end, their economy collapses. So Russia has tied themselves into a knot. So any kind of negotiations that are continuing have to have that in mind. The consideration is that the Russian regime and the elites, if the war comes to an end, even with a settled agreement on terms that are relatively favorable to them, even if that happens, they are in very deep trouble.
Saul Sadka, do stay with us as we turn over to our next story. And we head to some breaking news first. And the Kremlin has stated that no specific date has been decided yet for holding the next rounds of Ukraine peace talks. Kremlin officials say that there have been some contacts made with France, but there are no clear indications that Paris is intended for dialogue at the highest level. However, the Kremlin has taken note of French President Macron's recent statements where he mentioned that technical discussions are underway to restart talks with his Russian counterpart. The Kremlin says it is always remaining open for dialogue, and the Russian Defense Ministry has shared that its forces have reportedly taken control of Zalezhny in Ukraine's Zaporozhye region. We'll, of course, bring you all the updates coming out of that situation as soon as we get it. We move over to the Gulf next, and the UAE Minister of State, Lana Nuseibeh, visited Tehran on Monday for the second meeting of the Political Consultations Committee with Iran. In a meeting with Iran's Foreign Minister, Sayed Abbas Araghchi, Nuseibeh shared the UAE's commitment to expanding economic and trade relations with Iran, calling their talks constructive. Nuseibeh also welcomed the resumed US-Iran diplomatic engagement in Muscat, stressing her country's focus on regional stability and de-escalation of tensions. Moreover, Araghchi has also reaffirmed the strong relations between the UAE and Iran, expressing Iran's readiness to further enhance bilateral cooperation. Saul Sadka joins us once again. What more can you tell us about this, Saul? Of course, Donald Trump views those Gulf alliances as pretty central to his foreign policy. And now we have seen the United Arab Emirates and the Iranian foreign minister speak, and this will gear up for those talks coming up between the United States and Iran within the next few days. What more can you tell us about these talks, how you think they're going to go given the current standing?
The UAE has tied its horse to the Abraham Accords alongside Israel, the United States, and various other countries. And I, therefore, am very dubious. It looks very dubious to imagine that they are going to, in any case, be helping Iran in any real way. But certainly they might be being used by the Americans to bring them to the table. It would be amazing for the Americans if they could get Iran to meet their demands without the requirement for military strikes, because that would mean the Iranian regime would eventually, not immediately, but eventually collapse, because once they have no deterrence, that's the end of them. But the UAE certainly have been a good actor in all these dealings over the past, and I'm sure that will continue.
And so parallel to this, we're seeing a Benjamin Netanyahu visit to Washington. He's said to meet for Donald Trump for the sixth time, the most a foreign leader has met with the president in his second spell in the Oval Office. Does this meeting between Netanyahu and Trump risk souring things between the United States and Iran before things have really matured?
Well, I'm not sure if a seventh meeting between Netanyahu and Trump is going to be what sours the Americans on the Iranians. The Iranians, if you recall, for 47 years now, have been shouting death to America in the streets. So I don't think this is what's going to tip it over in the balance. The Americans have the Iranians at their whim. They are surrounding them with vast military equipment and can pick them apart if that's what they really wanted to. And the Iranians should take note that the Americans and the Israelis seem to be acting in lockstep. And even on occasions when there have been leaks about disagreements between Netanyahu and Trump and so on, those are generally preceded great acts of unity between the two in practice. So any kind of disagreements you might see between Trump and Netanyahu are as likely to be a misdirection to fool Iran into complacency as they are to be any kind of real disagreement. And in the end, it's quite clear that Netanyahu and Trump have a close personal bond. Their bond is not one of political expediency. They are actually friends. So that will make a very big difference, I think, to what's going to happen in the Middle East in the next few months.
However, of course, Donald Trump, at least for now, seems committed to diplomacy when it comes to Iran. Israel, however, has said that it will take matters into its own hands and strike Iran if it crosses its red line when it comes to its ballistic missile program. So obviously the two are on a different page when it comes to this. How do you think that might develop?
Well, I wouldn't say that. I mean, the Americans are totally capable of continuing negotiations with Iran, as they were doing in June and after the 12-day war. They continue the negotiations. They don't control Israel. They certainly can deny their control over Israel if they want to. And so the negotiations will continue, and Israel has the right to defend itself, and had they expressed the intent to do so. And if you recall, around the 31st of January, on Netanyahu's previous visit to the White House, and Trump told him in public, in front of the cameras, that Israel should do what it sees fit, and if they want to attack the Iranian ballistic missile programs, if they continue to build them up, they should. And if the Iranians try to restart their nuclear program, then Israel should attack, and I quote, fast. So what we're seeing is really just a kind of a dance where the Americans are using the Israelis as their potential attack dog, perhaps promising to help Iran, ring them in, as kind of a good cop, bad cop game, to offer to protect them if they give the Americans what they want. But really what the Americans want and what the Israelis want is the same thing. It could be, from a cynical perspective, that neither of them particularly care if there's regime change in Iran. But what they do want is they want the nuclear material, whatever remains of it, handed over, the nuclear program permanently closed down, and their ballistic missile program neutered to the extent that it no longer poses a major threat. And also for Iran to stop funding its proxies around the region that have caused so much chaos, destroyed Yemen, Lebanon, Syria, and more. So that's most likely what we expect to happen.
Sol Sadka, thank you so much for taking the time and joining us. It's a great pleasure to speak to you. We'll of course keep our viewers updated on that developing situation when that Trump-Netanyahu meeting comes around and those Iran-US talks commence. We turn over to the US now, and in the latest batch of Jeffrey Epstein files, a photo has emerged showing Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg and Tesla CEO Elon Musk at a lavish dinner party hosted by the paedophile Jeffrey Epstein in 2015. Despite Epstein's 2008 conviction for trafficking minors, Musk and Zuckerberg attended the event, which Epstein himself later described as wild. The guest list also included prominent figures like LinkedIn CEO Reid Hoffman and PayPal's Peter Thiel. However, Musk had previously denied attending any Epstein parties, even calling for the prosecution of those involved in Epstein's crimes. Meanwhile, Kimball Musk, Elon's brother, has clarified his connection to Epstein, stating that the emails between them were due to a newsletter Kimball sent out, not personal meetings. Furthermore, no direct evidence has been found linking any of these tech figures to Epstein's illegal activities. The new revelations come as further questions arise about the relationship Epstein maintained with powerful figures despite his criminal history. Now we turn to East Asia, and China has confirmed that discussions between Chinese and Philippine officials regarding the South China Sea will continue following a recent meeting in Cebu. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lin Jian has stated that both sides engaged in frank and in-depth exchanges on maritime issues and other areas of mutual concern. The two nations have agreed to continue their diplomatic dialogue and manage maritime differences effectively through continued communication. China emphasized that the discussions aimed to foster cooperation while addressing sensitive maritime concerns. crucial to maintaining peace and stability in the region. The meeting also underscored the importance of managing maritime situations to avoid escalation and promote stability in the region.
近日，中非外交部官员在菲律宾宿务举行了双边会见，就涉海等共同关心的问题，坦诚深入交换了意见。双方同意继续通过外交渠道保持沟通，妥善处理涉海分歧，管控好海上局势。
We turn over to Africa now, and Ethiopia is hosting a secret camp to train thousands of fighters for the Rapid Support Forces paramilitary group in neighbouring country Sudan. The camp constitutes the first direct evidence of Ethiopia's involvement in Sudan's civil war, marking a potentially dangerous development that provides the RSF a substantial supply of fresh soldiers as fighting escalates in Sudan's south. According to reports, Ethiopian government officials said that the United Arab Emirates has financed the camp's construction and provided military trainers and logistical support to the site. Joining us now is Ayanuga Olugbenga Paul, a public affairs analyst, joining us live from Lagos in Nigeria. Thank you so much for joining us. The Sudan war wages on, of course, something that the United Nations calls the worst humanitarian crisis. The UAE has been reported to be backing the paramilitary RSF forces who are fighting against the Sudanese government. If Ethiopia is directly training these RSF fighters, does this cross the line from regional mediators to an active participant in Sudan's war here?
Well, it came as a shock to me too when I saw the news about the training camp in Ethiopia, because I've been trying to look at all the angles and what benefits to what end will it be for Ethiopia to be sponsoring a recognized terrorist organization. I tried to see the connect from the area of ethnic affiliation to the area of investment partnership that will literally be to the benefit of Ethiopia, because I know nobody does this without logical reason, and I can't really pinpoint right now, to the level of my knowledge, why this is happening. And the location of this training camp also gives me a cause for concern. The fact that it is located near the great Renaissance Dam that has been in contention, between the Egyptian and the Sudanese authority on the flow of the River Nile, as it affects both country irrigation systems. So while I, on one part, want to think that maybe for the greater dam project politics and related systems, this might be the interest of Ethiopia, but I do not see that as being, quality enough reason. So I'm also looking at from the angle of international.
Okay, we seem to be having some network issues with Ayanuga currently. Hopefully we get him back in just a second. These reports that Ethiopia is hosting a secret training camp for fighters of Sudan's RSF forces. They mark a dangerous new phase in Sudan's civil war. Does this... so you're saying, Ayanuga, that the UAE's backing of the RSF forces, which have been said to have perpetrated atrocities across the country, are indeed credible?
Well, I think from all the information I've been looking at, especially from sources inside Ethiopia itself, it seems there's a level of credibility to the news. And for me, it looks as if, Ethiopia is putting fire on a roof they want to sit under, or they are putting snake under their bed. Because once the RSF forces that they have trained are through with the atrocity they are committing in Sudan, of course, definitely they are going to come back into Ethiopia and give them problems. The same example happened in my own country, Nigeria, here. And if they have not learned from that, I don't know what they would be able to learn from. It sets a dangerous precedent, especially in that volatile region of the of the continent, where from Sudan to Tanzania to Djibouti to Somaliland, you have these constant wars and insurgency activity happening to Central African Republic. I really feel terrible that Ethiopia is caught in the finger, and I try to analyze every angle of the cost-benefit analysis of the gains Ethiopia stands to have, and I can't put it together yet as of now to see why it is worth for them to have a training camp for such a terrorist organization in their country.
Ayanuga, do stay with us as we turn to our next story. And a student at Senegal University has tragically died after violent clashes broke out between police and students who were protesting for delayed stipend payments. The unrest occurred on Monday with Abdul Boya Ba, a second-year medical student who lost his life during the protest. The protests for the timely release of student stipends has been a recurring issue at various Senegalese universities. The Senegal government have confirmed the incident and expressed their condolences to the distressed families. We have some breaking news now, once again coming in from the African continent, and the UN Human Rights Chief has warned that growing tensions in Ethiopia's Tigray region could quickly descend into renewed conflict if urgent action is not taken. Despite a previous peace agreement in 2022, reports of insecurity, human rights abuses and lack of humanitarian access persisted. The UN is calling on all parties to de-escalate immediately, uphold the ceasefire, protect civilians and allow full access to aid, stressing that failure to act now could lead to devastating consequences. Well, that's all that we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Inter-Parliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with the US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Inter-Parliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with the US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. A U.S. judge blocks the deportation of Rumeysa Öztürk, a Turkish student at Tufts University. According to her lawyers, the decision is filed at a federal appeals court after her arrest during a crackdown on pro-Palestinian activists last year. Hong Kong leader John Lee praises the 20-year sentence given to pro-democracy media tycoon Jimmy Lai, calling his crimes severe. The United States, United Kingdom, and the United Nations condemn the jailing as unjust and urge his release on humanitarian grounds. Jeffrey Epstein associate Ghislaine Maxwell appears virtually from a Texas prison and refuses to answer the U.S. House Oversight Committee. Chair James Comer says she invokes the Fifth Amendment, blocking questions on Epstein and possible co-conspirators. U.S. President Donald Trump opposes Israel's annexation of the occupied West Bank as international criticism grows. The White House says a stable West Bank is key to Israel's security and regional peace. The United States and Armenia have agreed to cooperate on civil nuclear energy, deepening ties. The move follows a U.S.-brokered South Caucasus peace deal with Washington seeking to draw Yerevan closer. The UN says it is awaiting clarity on how much of nearly $4 billion in arrears the Trump administration will pay and when. UN chief warns of imminent financial collapse as the US confirms it plans a partial payment in the coming weeks. Burkina Faso's transitional parliament has approved a bill banning all political parties, repealing party charters and financing laws, and consolidating power under the military junta led by Captain Ibrahim Traoré. The move drew concerns from the UN rights chief, while the government defended the ban as a reset to end political polarization. According to media reports, Ethiopia is hosting a secret training camp for thousands of fighters from Sudan's Rapid Support Forces, marking the first direct evidence of Ethiopia's involvement in Sudan's civil war. 8 sources, including a senior Ethiopian official, said the United Arab Emirates financed the camp. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas has announced that the EU will propose a list of concessions to demand from Russia as part of a peace settlement to end the war in Ukraine. Speaking in Brussels, Kallas has emphasized that for any peace deal to succeed, European agreement is crucial. She has added that the conditions should be placed on Russia, not Ukraine, which has already faced immense pressure. Kallas's comments underline Europe's central role in the ongoing negotiations, as international powers, including Russia and the United States, continue to work towards finding a resolution to the conflict. Now we welcome Ms. Alison Mutler. She's a former AP Bureau Chief, joins us live from Bucharest. Thank you very much, Ms. Mutler, for joining us again. Good to see you.
Hello, Asuma.
Hi. Now looking at this, as we see Kaja Kallas's statements, do you think this will indirectly elongate or complicate the negotiation further? Or where do you think West or European Union and the coalition of the willing, where do you think they stand, or their effectiveness in the negotiations now?
Well, will it complicate the negotiations? Well, the negotiations are incredibly complicated, and there's been no breakthrough. And it's basically been Russia and the United States, and the United States is generally known to be more favorable to Russia because it wants to have Russia on its side to resolve this conflict and to move on to other geopolitical areas. Will it complicate it? I think Europe wants to change the narrative. I think it wants to make clear that there can be no sustainable peace without European involvement in the talks. So yes, it will perhaps complicate it, but we're not getting anywhere anyway. So, and I think Europe just wants to make it clear that Europe needs to have a role in these talks, because if United States and Russia try and pressurize Ukraine, which is the weaker party, into conceding, then it's just like putting a little plaster, a band-aid over a wound that in the next few weeks or months or years will break out again. It'll just be peace for the sake of peace. And what Europe is saying is we need sustainable peace, real peace, and that means Russia needs to make concessions, which it doesn't want to make, but the war is costing it. But it is a very tricky situation, and it's very complicated however you look at it.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for highlighting that. Yes, of course, the negotiations are complicated, but what's the effectiveness, or do you think that Ukraine, France, and all these European EU leaders trying to make or making statements, these kind of statements, is it effective? Does it really make difference? Where do you think exactly is their place in making these kind of statements?
I think they want to make a difference. I think that Europe wants to unite, become a stronger voice. We saw that over Greenland when, Donald Trump was sort of, well, I'm going to take Greenland, I need it, and that's it. And Europe did stand up to it. So I think Europe is trying to make its voice heard, and it is trying to make a difference. Whether it will have success or not is hard to say. Anyway, even as we stand, where we have Russia and we have we have Russia and we have the US, we're still not making any progress. This is about Europe trying stand up for itself and to be a greater force, which you've seen with, you know, J.D. Vance was booed at the Winter Olympics. We've seen it in Poland, where the U.S. ambassador was chastised by Poland. Europe is not going to does not want to play an obviously junior role. I think Europe is trying to say you cannot have peace. Whether or not make a difference, it's hard to say, but we have seen the Trump administration, particularly Donald Trump, backing off when Europe has stood up for itself.
So do you think that they are feeling like they're sidelined in these negotiations?
Year, and it's almost as if in recent weeks even that Europe has sort of gathered itself together, coordinated its efforts, and making sure that they are not sidelined. For sure they felt sidelined by Donald Trump. I mean, it's obvious that Europe is very annoying. It's almost pesky for Donald Trump. And for Russia, it's like an annoying fly. They'd rather Europe didn't exist, and they could just go over their heads if Europe, and just do a deal between Russia and United States and force Ukraine to accept the concessions. But it's a little bit more complicated than that, because obviously Donald Trump wants to come and say, look, I've resolved another war. Okay, it took me a bit longer than I thought, but I'm the only one that could have resolved it. But if it's only a sort of not a real peace, we'll have hostilities again, and they won't necessarily just stop at Ukraine. They may go to Moldova, they may go to the Baltic states, they may go to Poland, may go to Romania. So there is a difference between just declaring you have peace and actually having a peace that works and forcing Russia to make concessions, which it does not seem to want to do.
Right. Thank you very much, Ms. Mutler, for sharing that insight with us. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now, moving on, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has stated that the U.S. is focused on resolving European issues, including the Ukraine crisis, in order to shift its attention to countering China. In an interview, Lavrov has explained that analysts believe the U.S. will eventually seek an agreement with Russia, removing Ukraine from the negotiation table. He has emphasized that once Europe's issues are addressed, the U.S. will direct its major efforts towards China. Lavrov has noted that while this strategy is not openly stated, it is implied in U.S. defense and security policies. Now we welcome back Ms. Alison Mutler. She is joining us live from Bucharest. Thank you very much, Ms. Mutler, for staying with us. Now, looking at this, how do you analyze the current relationship and alignment of U.S. and Russia?
Well, it's much better than it has been under Biden, but this creates problems with Ukraine and with Europe. But I think the Russians are always worried that Donald Trump will turn, that he will not consider them as an equal partner. And Lavrov, in these statements, he's actually saying something that suits Russia. Russia wants the US to pressure Ukraine into coming to any old deal that suits Russia and not Ukraine, and then turn its eyes to China. That is what he wants, and that is why he's saying that. I'm sure there is some truth in that the United States, Trump, has had enough of the Ukraine war. It's been going on for four weeks, I think 4 years, sorry, next week, and he's absolutely had enough of it. And Russia wants this to be done and dusted in Russia's favor, and there is pretending to be an ally of the United States, and then United States can look at its real problem, which is China, because Russia is very keen to get everything it wants, its maximalist demands, in Ukraine. So it's saying something which is perhaps true, but it's also totally in Russia's interest. And Russia is very interested in keeping Donald Trump on side and keeping the United States putting pressure on Ukraine and basically treating them very, very much like a second-rate partner.
And what do you think, why is Sergei Lavrov making these kind of statements? What does this timing suggest? can we see it or analyze it as poking U.S.?
Yeah, but it's also poking China, saying that, you know, actually the US has bigger problems with China. It's also trying, in a way, to flatter, in a way, I suppose, to say, look, we know what the US policy is, we know what they really want, this is what we want. But the only reason that Lavrov says this is because it suits Russia, it suits the Kremlin. The Kremlin wants the Ukraine to be resolved in its favor, and it wants the US to turn its attention elsewhere. It doesn't want Europe involved, it doesn't want Ukraine to have you know any you know have any rights, or it wants Ukraine to be treated the way it wants, and it's hoping that Donald Trump will agree with it, which Donald Trump has. But the problem is more complicated than Russia and the US. But so, in a way, he's making a bit of he's being a bit not. You know, it could be risky, you know, saying that in fact China is a problem, because also Russia has a good relationship with China, but it's very much the junior partner. So in all these relations, Russia is the junior partner, but it wants to prove time and again that it's an equal or very important to the United States and to China.
And is these kind of statements or care by Russia towards U.S. and Europe welcomed by Europe? How is this seen by Europe?
No, Europe sees Russia. They don't trust Russia. Most European governments, apart from perhaps Hungary and Slovakia, who are more friendly towards Russia, they don't trust Russia. They're concerned that Russia is increasing its hybrid war, its cyber attacks, and as the German Chancellor said, Merz, we no longer have peace with Russia. And there are predictions that there will be a wider conflict with Russia, you know, as this decade progresses. You know, whatever happens in Ukraine, Russia does not seem, by the European mindset, to be a country that is set on peace. Quite the opposite. So Lavrov saying these statements, of course, annoys Russia. Annoys Europe. But then Europe is in a. There are tensions with Russia, so I don't think it expects anything more from Russia. But it won't help cooperation between Russia and Europe, that's for sure.
With that, I'd like to thank Ms. Alison Mutler for always joining us and sharing that insight. Thank you very much. Now we move on to Taiwan. Taiwan's trade negotiators have left for the U.S. for their final meeting on a trade and tariff deal. The agreement struck last month will reduce tariffs on Taiwan's exports to the U.S. from 20% to 15%. Taiwanese companies will invest $250 billion in the U.S. to boost sectors like semiconductors, energy, and AI, with an additional $250 billion in credit guaranteed to support further investment. Taiwan's Vice Premier Cheng Li-chun and Chief Negotiator Yang Zhen-Ni are yet to finalize the details of the Taiwan-U.S. agreement on reciprocal trade before presenting it for parliamentary approval. Now we welcome retired Major General Gigi Dwivedi. He's a war veteran and Professor of International Relations and Strategic Studies, joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Major General Dwivedi, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, looking at Taiwan and U.S., how important is it for Taiwan? And do you think Taiwan is able or capable to balance their strategic autonomy or to protect their, interest, while also pursuing to effectively bring in U.S.'s semiconductor, or promising to invest that much in U.S.?
Well, Suma, thank you.
Thank you.
If you look at the relations between Taiwan and U.S., well, formally, they don't have diplomatic relations. But then, under the Taiwan Relation Act of 1979, there is a very robust trade relation that is between Taiwan and U.S. In fact, Taiwan has a very robust trade surplus against US. So to even it out, now the trade agreement is being negotiated, and you are right that Taiwan Vice Premier Chang Li-chun, along with the chief negotiator, are headed to US today, and they will hammer out a negotiation so that this trade surplus or trade balances out. Well, you talked about the strategic autonomy. As I mentioned about the Taiwan Relation Act, there is an understanding between US and Taiwan that US will provide security to Taiwan in case it faces a aggressive or aggression from China. But this is not, openly stated. There is a ambiguity or some kind of hidden treaty or hidden agreement is there. Secondly, Taiwan by itself cannot protect, against the Chinese might. So therefore, from time to time, America keeps supplying the weapons, especially the defensive weapons, and also ensures that there is a balance is maintained as far as the Taiwanese defense is concerned. So now this new trade agreement where Taiwan plans to invest something like $250 billion would balance out the current trade surplus that is in favor of Taiwan. And also, Taiwan is a major power as far as the semiconductors are concerned. So therefore, they would be setting up manufacturing facility in US, and that is in sync with President Trump's policy of bringing back manufacturing to America. So therefore, this trade deal is very important, both from the economic and political dimension, because it will balance out the trade, and also Taiwan will be able to buy more weapons from America for its defense, which again would ensure that the current trade surplus is narrowed down. Asuma.